2 more minutes, and I believe all participants will join us. So, welcome again. My name is Yuliya Tychkivska. I'm Executive Director of Aspen Institute Kyiv, and I am delighted to host this panel with very prominent honored guests. So the topic of our panel is reforms in Ukraine, where international support is most needed. And I have this 2 honorable gentlemen, Ambassador Henrik Wilhelmsen, the OSCE project coordinator in Ukraine. Please greet him with applause. And it's a big honor to welcome Mr. Esteemed Norlo, Head of Office Representative of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe on the coordination of cooperation programs of the Council of Europe. Very long title. And the topic we will discuss today is quite provocative, and I'm very glad that we have a fantastic, one of the significant signs of Ideas Festivals that sometimes they have not less prominent and interesting guests in the room compared to the speakers. And I'm very happy that we have members of parliament, prominent journalists, and I believe we will have a fruitful discussion today. So I would prefer to have this very interactive communication, the interactive panel with all of you. So we will talk about reforms. And all of us Ukrainians, and I believe you as well, know that starting 30 years ago, we are talking about reforms we need. We talk about changing Soviet regime into more liberal setting. We talk about market economy. Same time we see rent seeking. We followed how rent seeking itself was established. We see how corrupted are many areas of Ukrainians' economy. So there are a lot of challenges. Same time, there are some successes, we Ukrainians consider, not all of us. Actually, I already mentioned previous presentation that it was very, very depressive in terms of Ukrainians mentioned nothing as a victory of 30 years history of Ukraine. That's quite depressive. But I do believe that we do have some successes. And it's so important to hear from 2 of you today because many of us understand how important is international support and international push sometimes. And some criticize that many reforms are simply established and implemented because of international pressure. And we could discuss whether it's good or bad and what is the role of our partners, our friends, international friends. And I would like to start with the first question and listen from 2 of you. What do you think? What reforms out of many, which especially started after 2014? Because we tend to believe that it was the most fruitful time in terms of changes which were implemented in Ukraine. What do you consider as the most important reforms? How you see them? Most successful reforms. We will start with Ambassador, and please, you have a mic.
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah, it does. I've lived in about 12 different countries, and there is this saying that the longer you've lived in a place, the less you understand it and the less you have to say about it. Therefore, I've been here for about 3 years. At the end of this year, my good friend Steen here has been living in Ukraine for about half a year. So he probably even has more to say about Ukraine than I do. But, let me I don't want to bore you about our organization, but we have a quite broad mandate in Ukraine. We look at military, political issues. We look at economic and environmental issues. We look at rule of law and human rights. Steen's organization is more focused on the rule of law and human rights, so I'll not say so much about the very extensive work that we do in human rights and rule of law. Most of it run by my very good colleagues Sasha and Vitaly, who sit over there. But let me Let me say about Ukraine, I've had, in spite of the corona pandemic, which has made life very difficult for all of us, I've had quite some opportunity to travel around Ukraine. I've seen a lot of the country, and can't say I've been everywhere, but I've certainly been in many, many different places. I don't want to be overly positive. We all know the problems that Ukraine is facing. We all know the problems that Ukraine has been facing since 2013, 2014, which are still going on, which has made life very difficult for the country and for Ukrainians in general. But I do, having traveled a lot around, I do see progress. I do see positive things as well. I do see things working in the right direction as well. Let me give a couple of examples also based on what our office has been involved in over these last years. I think if you look at digitalization of public services in Ukraine, I think that's an area where Ukraine is advancing very well. It's actually advancing better than in other countries. I'm from Denmark. It's coincidentally also staying. I used to live in the Netherlands before I came here. And for example, the banking sector. If you look at this app I have on my phone with my Dutch bank, which I still have, and the services I'm being offered with my Ukrainian bank in terms of digitalization, that kind of thing, it's actually more advanced in Ukraine. It actually works better. I heard that Yulia here, she had this very traumatic experience when she was in Italy a little while ago, that she couldn't pay things with her watch, you know, as you can do here in Ukraine. And
first world problems.
Yeah, and I'm mentioning digitalization for a reason, because it's a question of making public services more directly accessible directly to the people. That, I think, is a good sign of progress, and that brings me to the next point that I want to make. I think I also did come to Ukraine quite a lot in the 4 years before I actually moved here. So the last more than half a decade I've been coming to Ukraine regularly. And when I'm speaking about digitalization, services, access, people, I think also the role of civil society has been strengthened in Ukraine. It's growing, and the voice of people is more prominent, and it is more heard than it was before, which I think is a very good thing. We have had a number of initiatives going on in our office with regards to civil society and their interaction with the government, how we better make mechanisms to have the opinions of people taken more on board by the politician and by people in government. That, I think, is also a positive development. Clearly, the growing role and the stronger foundation of civil society in Ukraine and their voices, which is basically all of you. I'll not bang on, I'm not the only speaker. As I said, I've traveled a lot around Ukraine. I also do think that the decentralization process is a very positive thing. It's not uncomplicated. It's super difficult in many areas, but I visited many regions. I met with many mayors, and I see a lot of good progress, a lot of good work being done out there that has been made possible through the decentralization process. It's an ongoing project. It's not done, and there's a lot of work to be done. But that I also see as a very good thing. Of course, it's difficult. Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe, the way we look at it. It's bigger than France. It's got well, it's a long time since you had a population count, but you're not the only ones. You're probably around 40 million people, and 600,000 square kilometers. You know, I spent 15 years working in the former Yugoslavia, where my dear friend and colleague here also worked for many years. But you know, Ukraine is more than twice the size, if not 3 times the size of the entire former Yugoslavia before the breakup. So it's a huge country. It's very diversified. When you travel from the east to the west, from the north to the south, the problems are not the same. So therefore, a process like decentralization, it clearly takes time. But there are things, issues that I would say is on a good track. Digitalization, role of civil society, decentralization. These are positive things. I think we will talk about other issues when we get a bit further down in the panel. Sorry for talking so long, but...
no, that was great. I'm very grateful you mentioned decentralization, because in Aspen, at Aspen, we unite leaders from different areas, from different spheres. And what really inspires us recent years is that people switched this rhetorics about relying on a leader who will change everything, and this idea of bottom-up changes, of taking responsibility for your community first, and then make these changes from bottom to the national level. It became much popular approach now, and I also admire and I admit this decentralization reform as one of the key one. So I would like to just continue, Mr. Steen, to you, as a person who recently was greeted and welcomed to Ukraine. It's very, very important to hear from you. What is your perception? What is your first impression? And how you see Ukraine's success, reform successes?
Thank you very much, Yulia, and thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your Saturday with us. As you all know, the most precious thing we as humans have is time, and when we share it with each other, that is, of course, a sign of both respect and willingness to listen to each other, and already that is a success. So thank you very much for getting us together today, Yulia. The Council of Europe, I think one of the first successes of Ukraine, I would in all modesty say, was that when Ukraine joined the Council of Europe 25 years ago. Because by doing that, they joined the organization, the Pan-European organization, that stands for human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And thereby it took upon itself a lot of the standards that is entailed in the Convention of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights. And although that is not always easy to implement, not for Ukraine, not for any of the 47 member states, not even from Denmark, who recently had to change its laws on refugees due to a verdict from the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg. Ukraine is working very diligently on these issues. So I would say we always, when people get very depressed that things are not moving, and now again these internationals come and say something, that we have to change something, I think the important thing here to remember is that Ukraine decided and is a full member of the Council of Europe, and actually works much more than I think is often acknowledged to implement in its laws, in its standards, in its criminal code, in the prosecutor's office, in the prisons, all around the judicial system, actually the standards that we all work on, whether it's Denmark, France, the Netherlands was mentioned, Croatia or Ukraine. So I think that's important really to remember. On the democracy side, I think today, since we are people here, I think if we remember what Woodrow Wilson said, as we now are with the Aspen Institute, who reminded us that the ear of the leader must ring with the voices of the people. And I think one of the things that I have discovered here in Ukraine is actually something which I think many countries could learn from, because although there are expressed concern about certain developments in Ukraine, the fact that you all come here today, and as we talked about decentralization, there is a lot going on in Ukraine. I'll give you an example. Very recently, 2 days ago, I was in Kamyansk. I don't know how many of you have actually been there. One, yeah, two, three, okay. So a few of you have actually been there. They have in their coat of arms, they have in their gerb, if you like, they have Prometheus. You remember Prometheus was the guy who stole the fire of the gods and started building things. They have on their own... Prometei. Exactly. They have on their own behalf in 2017, they started introducing participatory budgeting. In other words, including the citizens directly in how to spend the money of the municipalities. The mayor was actually re-elected in 2020, so it couldn't have been a total failure. And now they have, on their own behalf, they have found out that they want to, just like Ukraine want on a central level, to create and promote active citizenship. They are now introducing participatory school budgeting. That is, that the pupils are directly involved in creating the space around their schools and having money for that. And then they come and ask us, oh, by the way, we have done all the work. Would you kindly check whether it's in accordance with your standards? Of course, we would very much like that. And thank you very much for asking you, but you have done all the work. Now, this is going on all around Ukraine, I would like to say, in the Lviv region, in Zhovka, Chernivtsi, and so on and so forth. So I think you can take courage to a certain extent that whether the revolution of dignity progressed in a way that everybody had hoped to is one question, but what I can tell you is that out in Ukraine, in the municipalities, and also in the state, which I know is often criticized, there's a lot of progress going on. And one other reform I would like to mention where recently more progress has happened is actually within the judicial sector. We are now starting the process as we speak of trying to re-establish the High Commission for the High Council of Judges in order to get the legal system to work again with assistance of legal experts. And this has, of course, been passed by law. In other words, it's been through the Rada. So this idea that it's been imposed on Ukraine, I think, is wrong. I think rather in this regard, I think, again, it serves to praise. And since we are a lot of lawyers here today, maybe we should remember what Wendell Holmes said. It is the province of knowledge to speak, and it is the privilege of wisdom to listen. So I will stop speaking and see if I can become a little bit wiser listening to you, Yulia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. And I have a few questions, and then we will invite our participants to join the conversation. But you know, we Ukrainians, and as we just saw in a previous session, this sociology which was shown, we are quite pessimistic very often, and we like to complain, and we see a lot of negative things around. We are really bad in mentioning successes, so it's very important you to mention and just to remind that not everything is that bad. But still, we do believe that there are a lot of failures, especially after revolution of dignity, like the request from the society, from population, the demand was so high, and the window of opportunities, we believe that it was quite open, widely open. But now we do feel somehow frustrated and disappointed that not all reforms were implemented. And, you know, we at Aspen, the center of all our activities, of our mission is a human being, a person, людина. So what do you think? Like two questions here. What is the factors? What are like criterias to assess reform, whether it's like successful or not? And second, maybe not a failure, but what experience which was not reflected enough after revolution of dignity? What disappointed you as those who supported this processes of reform, like for many years, and with your crucial international support? What do you see like the room or the space of opportunities to implement in the future? So simply saying, what are the failures which were not which could be avoided and which should be our focus in the future? This just trying to combine these two questions of criteria and failures. Ambassador.
Well, you know, when Danish politicians, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a politician, when Danish politicians, they get asked a question where they don't really know what to say, they will always say, that's a very good question. You know, let me try to say a few things about this. I discussed with my good friend and my legal advisor, Sasha Vodyanikov, a bit about these issues. And we discussed about this panel. And sometimes Sasha, he's a man of few words, and he said to me, you must not forget to mention legislation, institutions, people. Then he then he didn't really say anything more. So now I've done my duty. I've said legislation, institutions, people. Let me try to elaborate a bit. I think in any rule of law-based society, obviously, a legislation that has been passed by a parliament that has been elected in accordance with proper international and local standards, that's the key. That's where we start. We start with the legislation. To have the legislation function, you need to have strong institutions in order to serve the rights of the people. That's the fundamentals. I think in Ukraine, since the revolution of dignity, a lot has been done. I also understand the frustration that I understand also came out in the previous panel, that things are not happening quick enough. The institutions have been established, but it would be naive to think that in a big and very diverse country as Ukraine, which is facing a lot of trouble because of the factors we know, it would be naive to think that the institutions will begin to work perfectly from day one. They do take time to find their foundations, to find their feet. It takes time for them to work properly. And it's the responsibility of government, parliamentarians, everyone, to keep supporting the institutions until they work properly. I know it's frustrating that things don't happen quicker than they do. And you mentioned, well, the successes. I think there have been many. Some institutions, or a lot of institutions, have been established, and I think they have been established properly. Is it then a failure that they don't always work properly? I think, again, they need time to find their feet, but it may be a failure that from some sides of Ukrainian society, they have not been supported strongly enough. It's not enough that the institutions are there. They have to keep on being supported in order for them to work properly. Yulia, I think you mentioned...
that's a very, very, very important point. And just to add here, I had one very important for me conversation with Paschaver, economist, very wise guy, and we were discussing changes of values, values of society. And he mentioned, Yulia, listen, we need just two things to change values of Ukraine society: time and active actions. So simple.
Yeah, maybe not so simple. You know, you mentioned before, Yulia, about the reforms, that there is also a feeling in some parts of society that it's something that has been pressed upon Ukraine by international partners and stakeholders and all that kind of thing. I represent an international organization, you represent another one, and probably other people in the room represent others. I would beg to disagree a bit, because if we look at, or beg to disagree, if we look at where does the reform, the initiative and the impetus, where does it come from? It comes from quite exactly 30 years ago, when Ukraine coined its institution, and to steal an expression from my very good friend here, nailed themselves to the mast of a democratic path. Ukraine decided to transition from where it was to where it is now, at the middle station, to where it wants to be in the future. To use an expression that I don't really like all that much, it committed itself to a Euro-Atlantic future, if you like. And in order to join that club, there are certain international obligations that have to be complied with, not only for Ukraine, but from every country that is a member of that club of nations where Ukraine wants to belong. So therefore, the reason why I have this rather long interlude here is that I think the value of local ownership should not be underestimated. The future of Ukraine is in the hands of Ukraine. And there I think that Ukraine has actually been pretty good in very difficult circumstances to administer that obligation or that future. You have had an extremely difficult time the last 6, 7, 8 years, but still I think that democratic spirit that you committed yourself to those years ago, soon those many years ago, it's still very strong. When I travel around the country, I meet people, I talk to people, in my mind, in spite of all the difficulties, there's no doubt in my mind that the democratic spirit that you put on the table all those years ago, it's not broken. It's still there. But the thing about democracy is you have to work pretty hard at making it function.
Applause, I believe. It's very inspiring words. Yes,
You know,
democracy spirit. This was us.
The European, let's say the Western European countries, I don't want to say the European countries and Ukraine. Ukraine is a European country. But the Western European countries where they have a long democratic tradition, where it's well-founded, where it's well-protected, because of COVID, they have had very, very big problems in administering their democratic responsibilities because democracy is fragile. It has to be worked on, it has to be protected. I'm of course always talking too long, but let me just finish off. I think it's also a question of keeping, and here I'm not talking to you as Ukrainians, I'm talking to all of us. It's a question of being ready to invest the time and the effort with all the stakeholders that are involved to explain the essence and the need of why to change, how to change, and how to get ahead and build coalitions with those that want to support you as opposed to those that are against you. And I guess you know who I'm talking about. I think also in any reform process, and I have been involved in quite many of them, it's also to have the courage to recognize when mistakes have been made. Admit it, assume the responsibility, change the path, move on. I think also, and again back to that one, many of you are young, and you know, I was certainly more impatient when I was younger, but you know, I think it's also a question of there has to be a certain amount of patience in the expectation of results, but staying on the path, moving on, keep working.
Committed to result. True.
Yeah.
But I think exactly that, Yulia, and thank you for the other question. I mean, you did make the choice in 14. You changed the constitution, so it's in your constitution that you aspire to Euro-Atlantic integration. So I mean, as such, that strategic choice has been made by Ukrainians, and there you've written it into your constitution. I think. On reforms, I would of course say, for me it's quite easy to say what constitutes the success of a reform, because Ukraine is a member of the Council of Europe. There are monitoring mechanisms, so you can all actually just go in on the websites and look and see how Ukraine is doing, because it's rated like Denmark, like Germany. Ukraine is rated on the different progress it makes or not make, whether they execute the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, which Ukraine is also a party to, where there are still outstanding issues, I would like to say, which over time should be fixed. And then I would like to say perhaps one thing on this thing about reforms, Yulia, that you're talking about. I think it's also very important to remember that reform is not a static thing, right? There's also new challenges coming to Ukraine, like it comes to any other country. So in the middle of implementing a reform, a new challenge is coming. COVID is coming. Something else is coming. So therefore, coming back to Henrik's very good point, is that that's why you need institutions, right? That is in those times. That is when the institutions are the ones that will help you carry through the reform or stay the course, if you like. And I think Ukraine is working on that. There are, of course, challenges which are still there. We have There are issues with minorities, there are issues with languages, there are issues with media, as you know, but there are also successes as concerns, for example, media, the public broadcaster, and I know that there is actually reformed to a level where it is independent. It has its own independent board. I know that not many people are actually watching it yet. I hope you will start watching it so that we can get the numbers up. But what is often forgotten is actually what we have seen during COVID times is, again, regionally, many of the local radio stations and so on has been a go-to place to get accurate information on, for example, what is happening on COVID and so on, instead of many of the commercial channels. So again, I think, progress is being done, and there are obviously there are challenges out there still. But the fact that people in Ukraine actually still finds time on a Saturday to come and debate it, I think is also an example. As Henrik said, many countries in western part of Europe have had huge democratic challenges, and you'll see, I mean, you saw the recent elections, for example, in France, regional election, you saw the participation there was very, very low. And that is, of course, a huge, in the end, that is a huge democratic problem, not to single out France as such, just to say it's a trend that we see many places in Europe, that if people don't participate in their own democracy, democracy will wither away, right? And this is unfortunately a fact, and that is not something that I notice here in Ukraine. You can say, you said that people complain. Believe me, it's not only Ukrainians that complain. Everybody complains. Trust me. And the fact that that people complain, that people still debate the issues, that they can say nothing has happened. Well, if nothing has happened, they must know something about society, apparently. So that means that they do participate. So I think that Ukrainians taking the destiny into their own hands, if you like, and that's what I see in the organization that I represent, where, as I said, Ukraine has been a full member for 25 years. It's not the EU and NATO and other organizations is, of course, organizations that Ukraine aspire to be member of, but many of the standards that they need to fulfill in order, if they want to join those organizations, are the ones laid down either in the Council of Europe or in the OSCE, where Ukraine is a member. So I mean, when you like any citizen, you have the right to criticize your government, but I would also like to say that your government is also working in these organizations in order to promote what was promised in 2014 and which is written in your constitution. So I think that is also something that you should remember.
Thank you so much. And last blitz question from my side, not a protocol one. Imagine that if you were a president and prime minister in one person and have all resources, all tools to do whatever you want to, you dream to, like in a miracle, in a fairy tale. What will be the one reform you implemented first?
I can tell you very quickly, if you gave me all that power, the first thing I would do was give it back.
Great answer. Ambassador, which reform? Tell us. Not for the protocol. I could ask your colleagues to not listen to that.
Well, I guess he just passed it all on to me, didn't he?
All that power, like doubled, you know.
Judicial reform and anti-corruption.
I hear Yurchishin who is applauding, and probably he has a question about that. Okay, dear participants, I welcome you to ask questions. Wow, we have so many questions. We will start with Yaroslav, and then...
Yes, Yaroslav Yurchishin, Member of Parliament. First of all, thanks in your face, your structures, the ambassadors. In sphere of help of judicial reforms, really we have situation when Ukrainian and even international experts say something, our government don't hear nothing, but when something stated by Venice Commission or other international partners, we can have a result, maybe not in a short period, but still. So I have one question for two of you. We have problem that we try, so it's not a problem, it's obstacle, maybe challenges. We don't have problem in general in Ukraine. We just have many obstacles. We try to reform every sphere or every bench of management, state management, separately. So when we talking about judiciary, we first of all talking about courts, not about prosecutor office, not about the level of our judicial education, but still where we receive a good prosecutors, investigators, and judges when we don't have appropriate judiciary education, and when you want to be lawyers, you must pay a bribe to come into to start to study. So we have a good example where our international partners have like a coordination in some special sphere. Does we have accept? So the question is, does it will be good to create like a coordinating groups of international advisors and Ukrainian independent experts to create a structural plan for reforming, because reforming it's never-ending story. It's a process, and I want to thank Aspen because we have special seminars, judiciary and society, and on these seminars we have joined. Aspen joined together prosecutors, investigators, judges, even civic activists. So it's create like a network and help to receive result. It's like a small example how structural approach can give result.
What a great question. It's so nice when somebody is admitted our work. So Yaroslav, thank you so much. And this program is supported by our great partner, OSCE. So thanks to you. Maybe very briefly, please comment on the question, and we have a few more. So let's be quick.
Do them one by one, yeah? Yeah. I've worked in a number of countries in transition, and Ukraine is clearly a country in transition. It's a transition that began quite exactly, again, 30 years ago, and many congratulations on your Independence Day in a few days. It's still a country that's in transition. That's why you have the ongoing reform process. So as I believe I said earlier, it began those 30 years ago. We're at the middle station, and there's never an end station to democracy because it's a living and breathing thing. But there is somewhere where the country will need to go on its future path. I work in a number of countries in transition. And if you look at the issues that are being transitioned, or if you use the Ukrainian expression, being reformed, it is a characteristic that the judicial reform, rule of law and human rights, is always the element of reform and transition that takes the longest and is the hardest. And I think that's also very much the key here in Ukraine. It's again back to, thank you, Sasha Vodyanikov, for giving me three words. It's legislation, it's creating that legislation, it's creating the institutions that support it, and stick with it and keep supporting the institution for the good of the people. I think what you mentioned about creating a mechanism such as the one you mentioned, yeah, maybe that's a good idea, but I think the main thing is that when you have the institutions you've decided to have them, keep supporting them. It's unfortunately not a quick fix, particularly not when you're speaking judicial reform.
I don't have much to add. I think I fully agree with what Henrik said there, and there's perhaps, I mean, I could be cheeky and say you have such a forum. It's called the Verhovna Rada, huh? But I will not be so cheeky. So I think on the one hand, I think that you can say organizations in this country invited by Ukraine to assist Ukraine, of course, we all have a responsibility to coordinate among ourselves. So if that doesn't happen, which it doesn't always do, that is a responsibility that should be ours, of course. I mean, we should coordinate so that the assistance that we can offer Ukraine is delivered in the best and most efficient manner. There's no doubt, but that's a responsibility that we should bear, basically, right? And any time there's something wrong, you should point it out. I mean, this is quite clear. This is one thing I would say. The consultations with civil society, I think you touch on a very important point. Because it's been a little bit gone in phases in Ukraine, if I have to be frank and be a little bit both positive and a little bit critical, Yulia. Because, of course, you can say that the revolution of dignity, to a certain extent, was an expression of civil society reminding everyone which direction they were promised to go. As Churchill said, it takes courage to speak, it takes courage to listen, and sometimes perhaps it could be desired that government spend a little longer time to listen to civil society and consult in earnest with them. I have full respect. I'm also I have been a government official, so I also know that sometimes these reforms, on the one hand, everybody wants reforms and administration to go fast. On the other hand, everybody wants you to listen to them at the same time. So it's not always easy to strike the right balance, obviously, in governance and in consultation. Nonetheless, I think that is a point, of course, that is important. And you can rest assured that the Council of Europe, one of the things that we continuously repeat, including with legislation and the legislative process, is one of the things we would like to see is that there has taken more time in order to get better legislation. Sometimes you need better consultation. So I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Evgenia Podurets, and my question is, do you think that greater amount of international investment into Ukraine can serve as a push to our economy and our society, or do you think that the problem is not in the lack of international capital inflow, and it is rather embedded deeper into our society?
What a great question. Yes. That was a joke.
It's complicated. You know, I think that 10 minutes, yeah, got it. Gotta be brief. I think actually there is quite a big, there's big interest in investing in Ukraine. Let me be very provocative. When I'm traveling around the country, I very often talk to people who say, oh, Ukraine is a poor country. And I actually disagree with that. Ukraine is actually a rich country with a lot of resources, but it may be poorly administered at this point in time of its lifespan. It could be better administered. What I want to get at here, it's again back to judicial reform, it's again back to rule of law. In order to safeguard international investment and to encourage it, you need to have institutions that function. International investors, they have to be able to rely, if they run into a dispute, etc., that their rights are safeguarded, that they take them to a court in a non-corrupted system. So that's again back to the institutions. When it comes to international investment, everybody needs it. I mean, my country needs it. Well, it's the same as your country, by the way, but yeah, and all other countries. So need it, yes. Willingness, I also think it's there, but it's back to the institutions and the legislation and the people.
Yeah, I think I will just, I mean, again, I don't have much to add, but I think it's important to remember when we look at, I used to be head of analytics earlier, I worked with the OECD. I think one of the things that is always a precondition for economic development is a free market economy. It is also trade and a judiciary, and this is not something we're just making up. You can read the last demands of the IMF, which is basically an economic institution, the International Monetary Fund. It helps people, basically it helps countries with liquidity, if you like, capital. and you can see the first condition it puts on the next tranches is the judicial reform. So this is basically how it is. I think it's important to also, when you look at attracting investments now, I think it's also important to do it in the right manner. In the beginning of the 90s, we saw all around the world, we saw basically we only focused on free trade, and that's basically it. We didn't focus on having judicial institutional reforms in all the countries, and well, we see the results, which is unfortunately, I mean, Ukraine has suffered some of it. You can say this. How should I say, amassment of large amounts of wealth without having a structured market mechanism to distribute it afterwards. I will not mention any names, but I think we all know what we're talking about. And it's not only Ukraine, it's many other countries, and it has created some imbalances in the economy worldwide. So therefore, again, it is important, of course, to attract investment so that people can have something or that you can use, but you need to have a plan for what you need to use it for. You see, investment is only good if it helps you to become more productive, because it is the productivity that pays the salary of people, right? This is how it works. So if you get money in, then use it, improve the infrastructure, improve whatever the environment, do something with the money that can attract even more capital. And I think that is important to remember. The institutions, the judiciary, as Henrik correctly said, as the IMF is pointing to, and then also to have a plan for how to increase your productivity in this country, and so spend the money right, so to speak. That is also very important.
Thank you. We have time for one more, but provocative question. Not that... I'm just kidding, but polite one.
Okay. It is actually a bit controversial. So, here in Ukraine, a lot of people, especially from older generation, have this idea that democracy is slow, ineffective, and fragile, especially when it comes to change. So many people, especially older generation, they support an idea of a strong, a bit authoritarian leader who would come and change things quickly. And while I don't really personally believe in this, it's still a common idea, and I wanted to hear your comment on this. Like, are there any cases where a strong leader can actually be a driver of a fast change, or is it always a flawed and corrupt way to do things, and we'll always fire back?
Well, I will pose a question to you, because I think the model has been tested many places around the world. And I don't know whether the revolutionary avant-garde brought, I mean, what did it bring to Ukraine? Happiness? Positive change? What?
It's complicated.
Is it complicated? Okay. I think my simple answer would be that the problem is, the problem of this discussion is that it always presupposes that the strong leader does the right thing. We know from experience and from the old Greeks that we cannot, from the speeches of Pericles on the grave and all of this, that simply we cannot count on a poor person always having the right choices. That's why we invented democracy, in order to keep checks and balances going. So I think that is the answer in the end. So yes. Again, to quote Churchill, it's the most difficult governance form that we have, but it's the only one that works, right? And I think that is the answer to it, because we simply cannot count on a strong person making the right decisions all the time, and therefore change requires dialogue. Dialogue comes through democracy, and that's also how new ideas come. We just spoke about consultations with civil society and give them a platform, and that is, of course, also something which is allowed through a democratic decision-making process.
Yeah, just very quickly on that one. Of course, the whole idea of rule by one good person, that discussion, that versus democracy, tyranny versus democracy. It's a discussion that's, as my dear friends here said, it's as old as the notion of law itself, clearly. But that thing about one good person to rule them all, right? We're still looking, aren't we, for that one good person, right? I can't remember one good example where we've been able to find one that has run a country having all those powers I was just given before that I now don't want to give back. We're still looking for that one person, right? And democracy is the only option that we have been able to find that works somewhat successfully. Doesn't work perfectly. I understand the frustrations that the people you referred to, the older people who were brought up in another system and spent a lot of their time in another system, that there's something that they don't think is perfect about democracy. It's not perfect, but it's the best option we have. And by the way, I know that time is running. I was given all that power. I don't want to give it back. You know that power corrupts, but I mentioned anti-corruption. I meant judicial reform. I forgot to say, do something about the environment.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, democracy is the only option. Today we discuss our key successes, which is the digitalization, civil society, and decentralization reform. We talked about our homework, what should we work more about and on which reforms we should work more, which is judiciary and anti-corruption, and we will start immediately. We mentioned that I feel like Alexander Vadyanikov was with us in this panel. That's this guy, just you to know, Sasha, who was mentioned a few times. So now we discussed the success of the reforms, 3 factors, very inspiring combination formula. Legislation, institutions, and for the good of people, third component. So to conclude, we should be inspired by the path we choose, and we stated in our constitution, our direction, European integration direction, and work hard on all the reforms, remembering that a personality, a person is, and happiness of the person should be our goal and our biggest value. So thank you so much for this 2 gentlemen was with us. Thank you for supporting us, and that was very interesting conversation indeed.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.